Hi everyone, my name is Erin and I'm going to be talking to you about the discussion and limitations and implications portion of the article. Some of what I'm going to be talking about is a summary of the findings of the article and what people thought about it and some of the issues that they encountered when doing the study. So my first point is a lot of the time people believed that they were lying to avoid being punished when they gave their accounts. But despite that, many people believe that the TRC was effective in bringing out the truth, even though people thought they were lying. And a quote that I found in the article that I thought was a good way to describe that they did do a good job in bringing out the truth was, "It is no longer possible for the average South African to suffer from selective amnesia or to deny the nature and extent of the gross human rights violations that took place under the old regime and during the country's transition to democracy." My next point is the TRC was much less successful in bringing out reconciliation than the truth among ethnic groups. So they think that reconciliation has to happen on an individual level and it cannot be forced. And the TRC was going about it in a very large scale that they just couldn't make happen. Another thing is the families of the victims must accept what was being told to them was true, that the sincerity of the accused was genuine and they were only acting because they had to. And that was a general feel of what was happening during the TRC because the people had no other choice but to accept what was being told to them, and they had to keep going on with what that was. And a major goal of the TRC was to create something so that the wounds of the past would not get worse, and they were able to stop it from spreading onto future generations because they really wanted to end the animosity between the groups as soon as they could, because it was really important to them to make sure that didn't keep going on and that they addressed it now before it got too bad. And despite the goals of the TRC, all three ethnic groups did not believe in the legitimacy of the TRC. And without legitimacy, the TRC could not be effective, because if people don't believe it's really going to be a real thing, they're not going to really try, and they're not going to make sure that it stays nice and good. So there was different views on how it affected the society. The Xhosa thought it was very effective, but the Afrikaner and the English did not think it was effective. And the only reason to believe the Xhosa thought it was effective was because it was very open to the public and it seemed like it was in the best interest in the society as a whole. But the Afrikaner and the English might not have seen it as effective because it was bringing up old wounds, which could trigger some social unrest. But all three groups unanimously agreed that it did not have a positive effect on the South African economy. And the reasons for this were because they thought the money could be spent on better things like education or jobs, and that they should not have extended the interviews beyond its deadline because they really thought that there was better things they could be doing. And there are other issues in the country, and they thought that this was not something that was as important to them or an important thing to spend money on. But both the English and the Xhosa believed that it had a positive effect on politics, but the Afrikaners did not. And this is supported by the fact that the ex-prime minister and the ex-president did not show up to the hearings, and the Afrikaners are the ones whose regime favored the apartheid, so they are now being faced with the loss of power and potential for political instability, whereas the other groups really weren't in power, so this did not really affect them as much politically other than the fact that they got more political power, whereas the Afrikaners got less. And only the Xhosa and some English thought it would give a positive perspective to the world, whereas the Afrikaners and the other portion of the English did not think it gave a positive image because it made public all of the atrocities that went on, whereas some people's opinions were that it made them look like they were trying to fix what happened. And all three ethnic groups related the overall success of the TRC to the effect it had on the society, so the ratings were pretty low on that because they don't think it had that much effect on society. But they did not think bringing out the truth and reconciliation was important for short-term effects, but that it would be more important if it brought on long-term effects, and so they're still waiting to kind of judge the success of the TRC. So some of the limitations and implications were that it only covered 3 ethnic groups, whereas there are many in South Africa, and the sample size was relatively small because they only took examples from one place. And a TRC is difficult to relate to other countries because it is based off of South African personal experiences, even though like there are many places in the world that experience racial discrimination. But in this case, they were using it to specifically to the issues that went on in South Africa. And there are many other similarities to other countries. Like, for example, they use the example of the United States, where we have been known to have many racial tensions, and we did have slavery for a long time. And there are also many other cases of human against human atrocities around the world that we still see today. So they try to address it by using a non-violent way of addressing the problem and attempting to fix it. And they are still waiting to see the long-term effects of the TRC, but what they have seen so far is that it was pretty positive. And next, we're going to show you a video that is a good example of the post-apartheid South Africa and what people think about it now. And it's a good example because it shows an example of interracial dating in a school, and they say many things that are very similar to what is being said in the article.